Wearing a sadistic smile, a boy raises his hand, adorned with a peculiar bracelet that begins to glow, emitting a violent energy that engulfs his body as he declares his immortality. In the next moment, another boy with a loud voice suddenly shouts that he's won. He introduces himself as Ji Qing, a fairly well-known game streamer and writer of cliché online novels. Lately, he's been playing a game called Spirit Master. This comic-adapted game has sold over 100 million copies and has spawned countless merchandise. Unfortunately, the manga's author, Wang Xiaoming, disappeared 2 weeks ago, leading Ji Qing to conclude that good people really don't live long. Holding what seems like the same bracelet from the game, he remarked that this game company was actually very generous. As the first player to ever draw the card for the Undying Bone bracelet, he was thrilled to reveal that they had even gone so far as to craft a custom replica just for him. Going over its description in the game guide, he was amazed to find it even more impressive than he'd imagined. But just as he was lost in admiration, his phone suddenly began to vibrate, making him wonder who could possibly be calling him this late at night. As soon as he answered, the caller asked whether Ji Qing had gotten the bracelet and if he was prepared to leave. Still trying to piece things together, Ji Qing asked if the caller was with the game company. But the question was left hanging as the bracelet started to glow, and the caller instead mentioned they hoped Ji Qing would treat a certain person kindly, without naming who it was. Soon after, to his great surprise, his entire body began to glow and then dissolved into a blinding light. At the same time, a towering structure lit up at its peak, signaling its significance to this mysterious event. The scene then shifted to a mountainous area, where a tense atmosphere took hold as a flamboyant man kicked a basket on the ground. He assured a wary lady not to be afraid, insisting that he was a perfect gentleman and was only there to return something she had lost. Accompanied by his lackeys, the young man produced a handkerchief, explaining that she had left it in the peach blossom forest earlier. Despite her evident wariness, the lady managed to thank him and suggested he leave it on the fence. However, the young man, acting like a pervert, sniffed the handkerchief, praising its fragrance as if it were fine wine, and remarked on his good fortune to encounter such a beauty during his outing. One of his more cautious lackeys, noticing the lady's repeated appearances, advised the young man to be careful, pointing out that she had crossed their path more than twice. This made the young man wonder if the lackey was implying that she had intentionally lured him there. Overhearing their conversation, the cornered lady reached for the sickle nearby. She shouted for them not to come closer. Otherwise, Shen Qing, as she addressed herself, would take her own life. The young master, seemingly genuinely concerned, pushed his lackey aside and pleaded with her not to hurt herself. As a thin line of blood appeared on her neck, Shen Qing explained that, despite being an orphan, her late father had been a scholar, making her a descendant of a scholarly official's family. She declared that she would not allow herself to be humiliated and begged them to have mercy and leave her alone. Angered by the situation, the young master blamed his lackey for having a big mouth and kicked him in frustration. He then expressed his admiration for her resolve but gently urged her to put down the sickle. He suggested that she come with him, explaining that his family came from high-ranking state officials and could therefore be considered aristocratic. Despite his attempts to persuade her, she refused to be coerced. In the midst of this tense standoff, a sudden gust of wind drew their attention to something above. A huge, meteor-like object swiftly descended from the sky, making them mistake it for lightning on a clear day as it crashed into what seemed like a carriage. As the flames crackled and slowly dissipated along with the smoke, a solitary figure emerged, crouching with an aura of power and mystery. The young master watched with annoyance and perplexity, demanding the person to cut out his tricks and ordering the others to bring him down. Nevertheless, his lackey advised him to watch his words and not offend this person. Controlling the wind and lightning and soaring through the skies, the lackey speculated that this person was at least an expert in the Third Earth Seal stage. The young man protested, insisting that being an expert didn't give him the right to do whatever he pleased. He questioned who this person thought he was, having the audacity to cause trouble in their great state of Qin. Despite his protests, the lackeys quickly decided to run for their lives, dragging the young man away as he continued to shout. Xianqing, observing the man who had descended from the sky with ethereal powers and showing no fear of aristocrats, wondered if this person might be a fresh graduate traveling the world to sharpen his martial arts skills, as she had read in a book. The book stated that when such a graduate returns to his state with a complete education, he will be treated honorably, even by nobles. Still shaken from his sudden fall, Ji Qing struggled to comprehend what had happened and how he had survived such a tremendous height. Remembering that he had been on a call, he frantically searched for his phone, only to discover that his bracelet was now missing 2 of its teeth. Xianqing asked if he was okay, and as Ji Qing finally noticed her, he realized that her neck was bleeding. He suggested calling a cab to take her to the hospital. However, as he looked around, it dawned on him that they were in the middle of a mountainous area, far from civilization. Confused and anxious, Ji Qing grabbed her shoulders and shook her, demanding to know where he was, inadvertently worsening her injury. Realizing his mistake, he quickly let go and apologized for his carelessness. Despite her obvious discomfort, Xianqing assured him she was fine and explained that she was the valiant daughter of a general, so this wound was nothing to her. Interestingly, though, she had introduced herself as a scholar's daughter earlier. Seems like Xianqing isn't telling us the whole truth. With a formal bow, she then expressed her gratitude to her savior and invited him into her home, promising to prepare tea and a meal. As day gave way to night, Ji Qing began to grasp the gravity of his situation. He had been transmigrated into the Warring States period, of all places. However, this historical reality was unlike anything he had known. In the original timeline, the Qin dynasty successfully unified the Central Plains, bringing an end to the Warring States period. However, in this altered timeline, the unification never happened. The 7 nations continue to struggle for domination. In this millennium of chaos, different states are embroiled in the flames of war, each suffering its own losses, with hunger and death ever present. He recalled being sent here after answering the inexplicable call, but after further reflection, he realized the reason was the bracelet he had received. Although it only had a single tooth left, the fact that he had survived such a height meant that this bracelet must be the same one from the game. Though uncertain about his transport to the Warring States period instead of the game, Ji Qing was confident that the bracelet would prove extremely powerful in this era. Grabbing a blanket and fashioning it into a cape, he contemplated ruling this world as an emperor. First Emperor Qing didn't have a nice ring to it, so he began to wonder what he would call his state instead. He then dramatically opened the window and declared that everything outside would be his. Opening the door to provide him with clothes, Xianqing was left speechless upon seeing him act like a fool. Curious about his antics, Xianqing gave him a questioning look, understanding that Ji Qing was too embarrassed to respond. After trying on the clothes she provided, Ji Qing thanked her and praised her fitting skills. She mentioned that it belonged to her late father, expressing her gladness that he didn't mind. Upon recalling her full name as Wang Xianqing, he suggested she call him Big Brother Ji rather than Mr. Savior. Xianqing, though visibly preoccupied, agreed to his proposal. He then asked her to explain the current political landscape. In response, Xianqing mentioned that while she gained some knowledge from her late father's books, she felt it fell short of satisfying Ji Qing's curiosity as a savant. Curious about the concepts of savant and Earthseal stage, Ji Qing wondered if such ideas even existed during the Warring States period. Just as he was about to seek clarification, Ji Qing was taken aback and embarrassed when Xianqing revealed her pale skin and offered to spend the night with him. Although taken aback by her offer, Ji Qing advised her to stop, asking if she was planning to sleep in this place. Surprised by his unwillingness, Xianqing inquired if he was turning her down because she was of low birth. She believed his high standards were due to his status as a savant, likening herself to a mere weed in comparison to a tall pine like him. Ji Qing tried to deny this, but Xianqing continued, insisting that she must repay the favor but lamented that this was the only way she could do so. As Ji Qing attempted to console her, Xianqing unexpectedly took the initiative and pounced on him. She begged him not to think poorly of her, explaining that she only wanted to repay his kindness. Struggling with his urges, Ji Qing silently noted how direct women from this era seemed to be. He hesitantly reached out and touched her shoulder, but instead of what she might have expected, Ji Qing bolted out and shouted that he would spend the night in the woodshed, inwardly resolving that a good man should never accept this kind of repayment. Left on her own, Xianqing was surprised that Ji Qing was actually a gentleman. A savant with the surname Ji, she speculated that he was most likely a Zhou state nobleman from the Luyi Academy. Other than that, she observed that although his shoes were damaged, they were well made, further proving that he was either from a rich or influential family. Putting her hand on her face, Xuanqing's true intentions surfaced as she surmised that such an opportunity was hard to come by. As the new day dawned, Ji Qing yawned and remarked on the early morning, his weary eyes reflecting that he had struggled to sleep. Though he did get some sleep last night, he overlooked the chance to experiment with his bracelet's powers. Noticing a machete nearby, he contemplated using it to evaluate the bracelet's healing and blood restoration abilities. In his effort to handle the knife, Ji Qing was surprised by Xuanqing's sudden call, leading to an accidental cut. Anxiously, Xianqing informed that the jerk young master had returned, saying that he wanted to discuss the Tao. The young master called out, demanding that he get out. He chided Ji Qing for daring to steal his lady yet too cowardly to confront him. Emerging while holding his arm, Ji Qing asked what Tao they were talking about. The young master called him a country bumpkin in response, calling him out for not knowing that and explaining that it meant having a showdown. Observing the cut on his arm healed in seconds, Ji Qing concluded that the bracelet was working and this fight would be easy. Confirming the fight would be one-on-one, Ji Qing took his stance and asked who would fight him first. Unexpectedly, the frightened young master ordered him not to approach, asking if he didn't understand the proper etiquette for discussing the Tao. One of his lackeys then indicated another person, stating that this would be his opponent. Accompanied by a breezy wind, a white-haired man made a flashy entrance as he introduced himself as a visiting savant from the Shun Yang Academy. As the savant landed in front of the group, the young master expressed his hope that Savant Yin would lend them his hand. Although he regarded it as a minor issue, given that the young master was willing to trade Lord Ling's jade pendant, Savant Yin decided to confront the perceived nameless expert since he was already present. He then introduced himself as Yin Wei of Shun Yang Academy, challenging Ji Qing to a duel. Noticing Yin Wei's flashy abilities earlier, Ji Qing quickly deduced that he had somehow landed in a high-level martial arts era within the Warring States period. Thankfully, he had arrived with Xiaohao's bracelet, the rarest item in the wuxia game, giving him the confidence to take on any challenges this world might throw at him. Since Ji Qing was the one being challenged, Yin Wei graciously allowed him to make the first move. Assuming his stance, Ji Qing prepared to activate the bracelet's powerful offensive skill, just as he had done in the game. He shouted Spirit's Liberation, pointing his hand in Yin Wei's direction. Much to his expectation, his bracelet remained unresponsive to his grand gesture. Yin Wei watched with growing impatience as Ji Qing continued to shout out meaningless moves, embarrassing himself as nothing happened. He pondered why nothing was happening, questioning if he was doing it wrong. Having seen enough of his nonsense, Yin Wei concluded that Ji Qing was no expert at all. He scrutinized Ji Qing's sloppy movements, disorganized blood and energy, and inability to release the first level of the Earth Seal stage, concluding that he was merely an ordinary person unworthy of his serious effort. Despite this, the young master insisted that Ji Qing had indeed descended from the sky. Yin Wei, however, argued that various countries possessed special techniques that could even make a pig fall from the sky, thus invalidating the young master's argument. He flew to the top of the hut and instructed them to handle Ji Qing themselves, pointing out that 1 or 2 lackeys in the first level of the Earthseal stage should suffice. Feeling screwed by his early departure, the young master asked Yin Wei to stay. Meanwhile, Ji Qing found the situation troublesome, with only the bracelet's self-healing effect functioning. Amidst this predicament, the young master audaciously commanded him to bow. Pretending not to be afraid, Ji Qing questioned if he was daydreaming in response. Watching from the hut, Xianqing observed this unpredictable situation unfolding, the nearby machete appearing increasingly necessary. Asserting Ji Qing's lack of fighting prowess, the young master questioned who would bring him down. Despite this, all of his lackeys hesitated, expressing doubt in Master Yi's judgment. Seizing upon their fear, Ji Qing cast an intimidating look and asked if they wanted to die. Internally, he reflected on his 1,000-meter landing, confident it was no bluff and hoping to use it to scare them. Amidst the tension, Xianqing suddenly called out, holding the machete and questioning why Ji Qing tolerated Master Yi's insults without retaliating. She softly asked if he was avoiding confrontation for her sake, assuring him that she wasn't afraid and was willing to accompany him anywhere. Much to her shock, Ji Qing confessed that he was merely an ordinary person and not a savant, therefore not capable of defeating this group. Despite this, he assured her that he could still intimidate them, advising her to run and not look back. He then belittled Savant Yin as a mere child, asserting that he spared him due to his exceptional talent which he didn't want to destroy. Drawing the group's attention, he proclaimed himself as the general of some heaven-destroying nonsense alliance, his voice dripping with mock authority. The lackeys exchanged uneasy glances, murmuring among themselves as they debated what to do next. Some suggested a temporary retreat, clearly shaken by Ji Qing's audacious claims. Watching their reactions, Ji Qing couldn't help but smirk, amused by how easily he had managed to intimidate this group of thugs. But just as he was about to turn to his supposed ally, a sudden slash cut across his arm. This attack came as a surprise, as not only was it unexpected but also an act of betrayal. Ji Qing turned to look at his assailant, his eyes widening as if in search of an explanation. With a cold expression contrary to her previous facade, Xianqing expressed her disdain that he was actually a fake cultivator all along. As Ji Qing slumped to the ground, Xianqing unexpectedly discarded her weapon and ran to the group, claiming that Ji Qing was a bandit and that she had been forcefully held captive by him. Understandably puzzled, the group watched her as she continued her charade, asserting that Ji Qing was not a cultivator and asking him to be killed. In return, she added that she was willing to be a maidservant and serve the gullible fool, who laughed heartily as he assured her not to be afraid, asking his lackeys to teach Ji Qing a lesson for tricking him. In the heat of the moment, Ji Qing began to sweat heavily as he tried to process the situation, his undying bracelet no longer attached to his body. Following their young master's orders, the group of lackeys began roughing him up. They then reminded him of his earlier cockiness and mentioned his so-called heaven-destroying alliance, questioning if he had taken them for fools. Despite his battered condition, Ji Qing's eyes remained fierce as he thought about retrieving the undying bracelet. He started dragging his body forward with great effort, leaving a trail of blood behind him. The lackeys watched him with mockery and amusement, making remarks about his stubbornness and placing bets on how far he could crawl. One of the lackeys then informed his comrade that he was about to lose the bet. But just as Ji Qing was about to reach his severed arm, the losing lackey brutally stomped him to the ground, declaring that Ji Qing shouldn't make it past 8 steps, as he had claimed in his bet. Though some complained about the lackey's interference, one instead questioned whether Ji Qing was already dead, to which another replied that their comrade could crush a horse with his foot, let alone a human. Despite such beatings, Ji Qing refused to give up and willed his body to move. As he finally reached his arm, a perplexing sound, like a heartbeat, suddenly alerted the group. The more knowledgeable lackey gazed in Ji Qing's direction, his face unmistakably shocked as he recognized that this sound indicated the unlocking of the earth seal in one's body. Simultaneously, Ji Qing began to glow as a mysterious pressure emanated from his body, his severed arm reattaching itself with the help of the undying bracelet. Wearing a menacing smile, he staggered to his feet, prompting the baffled lackeys to urge their expert to take action immediately. Heeding their advice, the strongest of the group channeled his strength and prepared to punch, questioning the point of unlocking the Earth Seal stage if Ji Qing was going to die anyway. As the blow landed cleanly on Ji Qing's face, the lackey boasted that he too was in the first level of the Earth Seal stage and could crush iron and stone with his fist. Despite the hit, Ji Qing maintained his menacing smile, causing his attacker to quickly realize that he had messed around and was about to find out. With his strength fully concentrated in his fist, Ji Qing unleashed a devastating punch that sent his opponent straight to hell. The onlookers shuddered in fear as Ji Qing gazed in their direction. The devil himself had marked them as his next prey. Moments later, only the desperate pleading of a single person broke the silence. The cautious lackey tried to shift the blame onto Shen Qing, claiming that she had seduced their young master and betrayed Ji Qing. Desperate to save his own life, the lackey proposed sparing him and taking Ji Qing to Yong City, where he could be recommended to their young master. He added that his young master came from an aristocratic family in Yong City and was in need of experts, insisting that a mere maidservant was nothing compared to a great hero like Ji Qing. Ignoring the lackey's offer, Ji Qing instead asked if he was strong. The lackey nodded vigorously, stating that Ji Qing had just killed their expert with a single punch and that no one in their young master's entourage could defeat him. Confident that his strength was more than enough for his revenge, Ji Qing cracked his knuckles as he prepared to deliver the lackey's well-deserved beating. After the carnage, bodies lay scattered around, with Ji Qing standing in the center, huffing. He wondered if he had just unlocked that earth-whatever stage and gone berserk, suspecting it might have been due to the undying bone bracelet. Concluding that Shen Qing had gone to Yong City, Ji Qing gazed toward the not-so-distant future, his eyes burning with the desire for revenge and good explanation.